Note to potential subscribers, hint hint, if you want me to fall in love with you, just play me some Guilty Gear music. It can be on a boombox, Bluetooth speaker, or even just your phone. Though I won't actually fall in love with you, cause that's not how I work, but I do love Guilty Gear music. Metal is tied with blues, jazz, and rock for my favorite music genre, so obviously ArcSys games have some of my favorite soundtracks ever. And now that Guilty Gear Strive's next DLC character is the favorite character of people who don't play Guilty Gear, I thought that I would dip my toes into the game. I've actually been planning to make at least one video on Guilty Gear for quite a while now, and since I've recently admitted to being a huge BlazBlue fan who is willing to defend its story to the best of my ability, I might as well obsess over Guilty Gear. Baiken's theme has always been one of my favorites in each Guilty Gear game. That I played, at least. I mean, how many Baiken themes can you name off the top of your head? 2? 3? Well, there's actually way more than that. How much? Well, keep watching the video to find out, even though you can just look at the chapters and find out almost immediately. But please, don't do that. I really need the watch time. The first Baiken theme is the beginning of many renditions of Momentary Life. The Guilty Gear Wiki says that it's a blend of gagaku, a type of Japanese classical music, and thrash metal, a subgenre of metal with more aggressive tempos and rhythms. Some of the instruments that seem to be used are the koto and shakuhachi flute. But what they might not know is that some of that is actually wrong. Even though I'm not an expert on Japanese music and instruments, I'm pretty sure that the instrument being used is a shamisen and not a koto. A MIDI shamisen to be sure. But I say this because, for one, the opening riff has moments of playing two notes at once, which while the koto is also able to do, it is not in the same roughish way that the shamisen is doing here. And for two, the koto is always stuck in a pentatonic scale, basically one of these three scales right here, whereas the shamisen is not limited by such scales. Unless someone is willing and able to do a full cover of Momentary Life on a koto in the original key, I'm convinced that this is a shamisen. Anyways, the shamisen used with the thrash metal style in Momentary Life feels more like a fast-paced samurai duel. I mean, apart from one, maybe two exceptions, all of Baiken's themes fit her very well. But this is the only version of Momentary Life that fully commits to Japanese instruments in the melody, barring the B section, which features a synthesizer, which I don't quite understand why it's there, but it is made up for by the chorus, which features a shakuhachi flute that plays along with the shamisen. It creates a very exotically hype sound that really boosts the chorus's effect and makes the loop transition really smooth. It's a great Baiken theme, but it does have one notable problem. The instrumentation in the first verse has the shamisen melody drowned out by the guitar's power chords. As we'll get into later, this is not a shamisen problem as much as it's a MIDI limitation. Nowadays you can change the volumes of instruments in case the melody needs to be clearer, but I don't believe this was the case back then. Then again, I feel like you'd still have to make several liberties to make a shamisen outplay something like an electric guitar, let alone one that is likely boosted by an amp. This is why, for future iterations of Momentary Life, they gave the melody the old 1-2 switch! In Guilty Gear X, the melody is played by the electric guitar instead of the shamisen, but that doesn't mean they ditched it entirely. It's still used in the riff since that's how Baiken's theme has to begin, but it also plays that riff during the looping transition as well. Not just to keep identity, but to also add that extra flavor before it loops. Although you might not have noticed it beforehand, the shamisen is in the chorus as well. However, instead of being used in a failed attempt to play louder than the amplified guitars, it's used to add that extra layer of music to the chorus so that it entices the listener when it starts playing. And it even gives a couple measures to play a little fill on its own. But despite the shamisen remaining present even in the chorus, it seems like Mom said it's the flute's turn to get drowned out by the guitars. I still think it has enough of that Japanese style of music to keep the style of Baiken's theme, and I feel that it's better than the original version since the melody is easier to listen to overall. But I do know that some people say that this hinders the charm of the original, and my response to that would be in the heavy rock tracks version. Just so we're clear, this version was used in Guilty Gear X Plus, but just for simplicity, I'm going to be calling this version the Heavy Rock Tracks version. I mean, it's more fun to say in my opinion. To begin, I just want to say that I love this version's use of cymbals. The ride bell is used to imitate the sound of a fusagane. It doesn't play through every section, but it still adds a brilliant bridge that blends thrash metal and gagaku music. They also have China cymbals that add a more Asian sound, obviously for more reasons than that one, and the way that they come in during the B section has me kissing the chef. Platonically, of course. Funny enough, all of these cymbals were technically in the original X version as well. It's just that the lower quality sound of the original X version meant that they weren't as pronounced as they could have been. This is where you can really start to hear that shamisen jamming with the guitar at points. The Heavy Rock Tracks version has it playing much clearer. This is also where the Guilty Gear soundtrack started to sound less MIDI-esque. I don't think that they were live recordings, but they still have a much more modern sound to them. Not that I would want to beat the shit out of those old MIDI tracks with whatever beef I can make for exclusive situations, but my vegetarian preferences simply prefer to move within modern times. That's all. So far, this is the best Baiken theme that I've looked at, but we still haven't looked at the most popular version of Momentary Life. This isn't it though. Hey, did you know that Guilty Gear X got a GBA port? And did you know that the entire soundtrack is in 8-bit? Why is it that every 8-bit rock theme makes me think of Mega Man? Maybe I should talk about Mega Man music once I get more subscribers. My right hand says that it's bad because the 8-bit style makes it lose some of that Japanese flair that the previous versions had, but then again, to counter my own argument, Baiken doesn't have a right hand. So the left hand is saying that it's still good. One of the benefits of 8-bit music is that it's easier to hear the harmonization. The opening riff is played in perfect fourths, my favorite musical interval. They're still prevalent in most of the other remixes, but X Advance is the easiest version to hear them. Aside from that, there isn't a whole lot that stands out from the other versions of the song. It's just a really solid 8-bit remix. Though unfortunately, this is the weakest theme so far, but something has to be put in last place. On a brighter note, let's talk about the real most popular version of Momentary Life. At first glance, X2's version doesn't seem too different from the Heavy Rock Tracks version, with the only noticeable difference being the lack of ride bell in the intro. I do miss that ride bell, but what this track makes up for is a little more clarity. The China cymbal sounds are still there in small doses, and the shamisen is easier to hear during the sections it plays in. It doesn't overpower the guitar, obviously, but it adds a particular tanginess when it does appear. However, the biggest game changer for me is that this version has the best use of the shakuhachi flute. Not only does it have a dedicated note in the opening, but the way that it combines with the guitars in the chorus is so good. Absolutely perfect sound balancing. They even added a rock organ sound that plays in the intro and the chorus. It's extremely subtle, but it's magnificent in terms of layering. You can tell that this is where the Guilty Gear soundtrack stopped being limited by MIDI instruments. Therefore, this may actually be the best version of Momentary Life. I mean, hey, the theme's so nice, they made it twice. The vocal version doesn't have too many differences from the original. The only ones that I am able to point out are the lack of shakuhachi flute in the chorus and the massive amount of reverb in the instruments, which sounds kind of weird to me because I'm expecting the original X2 version, but whatever. Now that leaves me to go over the lyrics. It's supposed to convey the idea of someone mowing down the enemies with a blade, which does fit Baiken pretty well, but otherwise the lyrics are interesting. I mean, I'm a sucker for these cheesy Arxis vocal tracks, though I firmly believe that a few of the BlazBlue vocal tracks are unironically really good, but I digress. One of the guys that sang the vocal tracks for X2 actually has talked about some context of the Guilty Gear vocal tracks in general, such as how he and a few other people had to retranslate the original lyrics themselves, how he had never even heard of Guilty Gear before working on this, and how his vocal techniques were meant to be a tribute to Dan Zig. In order to put that into perspective, what he did was lower his throat while singing. This can help give him a deeper voice and make it easier to sing low notes like mother, something like that. At least I think that's how it works. The lyrics are not sung to the rhythm of the guitar melody, unlike how BlazBlue would arrange their lyrics. This does add a rather nice counterpoint and flow, even if there's nothing truly groundbreaking. But then again, the lyrics were never meant to be taken seriously. It's just a fun song with cheesy and enjoyable lyrics, though the lack of shakuhachi flute in the chorus does make this slightly worse than the instrumental X2 version for me. But with that wraps up all of the Baiken themes named Momentary Life. So now that means we have to address the Korean soundtrack. Okay, this is interesting. Definitely would not have been my first choice to be a Baiken theme. It honestly reminds me of F-Zero, if I'm being honest. Not sure why the Korean version is like this, but I'd be lying if I said I didn't love this. It's pretty basic as far as heavy metal goes, but who cares? Even basic heavy metal goes in hard. I mean, anything that reminds me of F-Zero is an easy way to make me fall in outspoken appreciation for you. The Korean soundtrack in general is really, really good, and this one is no different. But let's be real, this does not fit Baiken very well at all. Maybe it can work in the right context, but the other Baiken themes in this video are able to fit her in all contexts. This includes themes that are meant to fit Anji and Chip. Wait, what? Alright, so for one, please excuse the limited footage. There's almost no footage of Baiken in Guilty Gear Isuka. And second, as far as I'm concerned, Guilty Gear Isuka doesn't have many dedicated character themes. But Baiken is still one of the characters associated with this theme, so it counts for this video. I've always found the beginning to be a bit weird since the chanting and whistles do sound kind of out of place, but then the drums come pulsing in like a heartbeat and it's a headbanger now. The main instrument is still not a koto, but it's not a shamisen either. My best guess would be that it's a mandolin, which is a South American guitar-like instrument. It's thematically appropriate because of the whole South American festival vibe in this piece. This type of vibe is definitely more fitting on someone like Anji, but the heavy drums also fit Baiken as well. The mandolin melody is still catchy and it's able to play on top of the electric guitars wonderfully. Then the electric guitars get a moment in the spotlight and it's not as good as the mandolin section in my opinion, or at least it should have combined the two instruments for a counterpoint chorus, but still a good theme. Better than a few versions of Momentary Life, more fitting for Baiken than Ricochet, but not as good as some of the best remixes of Momentary Life. And with Judgment not having an officially named Baiken theme, we can skip right on over to Guilty Gear Xrd. As far as I have been able to see, this is probably the Baiken theme that most people are familiar with. It brings back the same riff from Momentary Life. Hey, that's a cool nod. But ROKUMON definitely has more thrash than before. But guess what we hear once the melody kicks in? Why don't we take a listen? At last, a koto! It's the right octave, the right pentatonic scale, and the right texture. This koto in particular is called a Yamato goto, which is a smaller koto instrument with less octaves, but can play higher notes. It's basically the equivalent of the relationship between a flute and a piccolo. They even bring back the shakuhachi flute and even add both a kotsuzumi drum and a kabuki. These two instruments really help support the fast-paced drum set so that the flute is able to sound more aggressive. Also, the constant dissonances between the flute and the guitars, so good. I've been saying that quite a lot, but so good. This is probably the most thrash metal scene out of all of Baiken's themes. Really captures that aggressive side of Baiken better than any other version of Momentary Life. Doesn't mean that it's better than them though. I think it's tied with the heavy rock tracks version, but not the X2 version. Otherwise, ROKUMON is smoking hot! Speaking of which... Smoking Hot is Samurai Shodown's interpretation of not just Momentary Life, but also ROKUMON. It brings back the same riff as Momentary Life, but also includes the aggressive drums of ROKUMON, all while adding in that SamSho flair. This means that the style of metal isn't thrash metal like it is in Guilty Gear. This time it is pretty standard metal. Plus the opening riff isn't played by a shamisen this time. In fact, I don't even think it's played by a Japanese instrument. Based on the audio effects that I can hear, it could be a guitar edited during production. There's also a second instrument that has not been used in any of the other Baiken themes so far. My best guess is that it could be a Kongho harp, but I'm not sure. What I I do know is that even though this theme is meant to capture her tough exterior, it also captures her more mellow characteristics. Short version is that ever since Xrd, Baiken has started to chill out around other people, devoting herself to Haehyun, becoming less bloodthirsty and vengeful, etc, etc. The electric guitars are played in a way where you can feel this side of her while still being played in the same aggressive style as before. So we essentially see a character being fleshed out through an instrumental song. Man, Samurai Shodown's soundtrack is just so underrated. Better yet, the game itself is underrated. If only it had rollback netcode. I mean, that's what Strive did. By the way, hot take of the night, Baiken's theme in Strive is literally one of the best themes in the entire game. Hey, congrats, Strive! You made another banger. People are already going on like, oh, the song begins when the match ends. Yeah, but it's still great. Even though it's drastically different from the other Baiken themes, aside from Ricochet, it still maintains that Japanese flair. See the rare sighting of a Guilty Gear theme singing Japanese lyrics. It's mostly sung in English, but the Japanese lyrics are there to give it the same sense of identity that it used to have. I haven't had the time to do a full lyrical analysis of this theme, but based on what I've been able to quickly find online, the beginning is actually the mantra of light chant from Buddhism. This highlights how Baiken in Strive is learning to let go of her revenge. At first, she begins to label herself as an enemy of the world, but then the song starts to go to a place that is familiar yet unexpected. In the Once again, putting the focus on Baiken's recent characterization, it shows how she sees herself as the same sort of enemy that the world has given her, as if she's looking in a mirror of the world. But having seen that mirror, she vows to cut herself from her past and instead keep moving forward. Maybe even share a drink with a few people. Keep in mind that this is a rough lyrical analysis, so if I'm misinterpreting anything, now you know why. But regardless, much like the vocal version of Momentary Life, it's a fun theme with lyrics that don't take themselves too seriously, but to be fair, Mirror of the World is trying to say a little more about Baiken's character. Whatever comes of her characterization will be revealed once the Another Story has been released. As for what I think of this Baiken theme, well, let's find out once we rank all of the themes from this video. Momentary Life Advance, Momentary Life Original, Ricochet, Momentary Life X, Drumhead Pulsation, Momentary Life X2 Vocal Version, ROKUMON, Momentary Life Heavy Rock Tracks, Momentary Life X2, Smoking Hot, and Mirror of the World. You know, this was a really fun video ranking. I kinda knew going in that I would have to listen to the same song for 2/3 of the video, but I'm surprised at how many differences I was able to notice. It made me even more excited to look at the rest of Baiken's themes, just to see how her character theme can be translated into a new one. I'm pretty interested in ranking other Guilty Gear character themes as well, or even dive into other fighting game themes. But you will have to like, comment, and subscribe before I can do any of that!